Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we conclude with Part 10, Recent Mystical Movements, from America's Assignment with Destiny by Manly P. Hall. Recent Mystical Movements. The recent activities of the older secret societies, with one or two notable exceptions, is difficult to trace. Numerous orders, fraternities, societies, and cults have came into existence, many claiming an honorable antiquity, but few in a position to prove their claims to those of scholarly inclination. These recent movements may be broadly considered as revivals of old learning, but when their pretensions are seriously investigated, the findings are inconclusive. For this reason, it seems wiser to refrain from passing judgment upon any of them. Even the most sincere efforts to clarify the situation would result in unfortunate animosities. Those addicted to the numerous sects are generally more devout than analytical, and nothing would be gained by offending the devotees of any religious persuasion. The difficulty of tracing historical descents is also increased by the innumerable divisions which arose in the American religious life. The rise of science undermined the larger institutions of theology and induced thoughtful persons to seek spiritual consolation in movements offering broader and deeper interpretations of rituals and dogmas. As the demand increased, the supply correspondingly enlarged until the boundaries of orthodox lost definition. The 19th century intellectual became a free thinker, convinced that his own judgment was superior to that of the clergy. The free thinker was neither an agnostic nor an atheist. He was a liberal, convinced that freedom included the privilege of questioning authority, both sacred and profane. Emancipation, however, was a mixed blessing. It was one thing to escape old superstitions, and quite another thing to be wise enough not to fall into new errors. Many beliefs that flourished for a time were slight improvements, but had the virtue of being different, if not better. As may be expected, there was a luxurious growth of absurd notions. They flourished upon the prevailing ignorance. But having no roots in good soul, these parasitical cults were fascinating but ineffective. The more bizarre were short-lived or survived only at the expense of the credulous. Substantially, the citizens of the 19th century received as a legacy the principles and convictions of the 18th century political societies. The Age of Reason had secured the rights of man. It then remained for education to provide the machinery required to protect those rights. Democracy had emerged as a fact, but the fact was not sufficient. The theory of freedom could be preserved by secret societies, but the practice of freedom required the cooperation of an enlightened people dedicated to a lofty ethical standard. When evaluating the esoteric groups of this period, the most reliable guide is their acceptance of the responsibility of the great plan. Progress is not ordinarily for the advancement of the individual, but for the unfoldment of the universal project. The real esoteric schools still labor towards the goal of the world commonwealth. The plan remains utopian, and the disciple advancing through the grades of a legitimate initiate system is being prepared not for personal emancipation, but as an instrument for the liberation of his fellow men. Wherever religious inducements are personal and selfish, or the devotee is encouraged to advance his own growth without consideration for others, there is something wrong with the policy of the sect. Yet, the literature of modern metaphysical movements seldom emphasize growth as responsibility. The reader is encouraged to study mystical systems or to affiliate with organizations claiming extraordinary knowledge in the hope that he will acquire the skill to advance his own condition. Where such objectives are used to intrigue the gullible, those of sincere mind and heart are entitled to reservations. The old secret societies remain as they had always been, custodians of an overconviction. They are now emphasizing the right use of privileges. Education can be conferred by schools and universities, but enlightenment must still result from internal growth. Without the proper development of his superphysical resources, the individual cannot protect his physical rights and privileges. Progress of society always demands that the human being, as a person, be in advance of the institutions which he creates. When leadership passes to the keeping of external enterprises, the person becomes a slave to his own project. This is not the plan, and if the condition continues uncorrected, physical society will collapse upon the individual, burying him beneath the debris of his own productions. With the rise of materialism, these secret societies were concealed from the profane, not by an elaborate machinery of their own, but by popular disbelief. There was no place for sacred institutions in the minds already dedicated to scientific skepticism. The importance of invisible principles over visible purposes and ambitions was simply ignored. Only that small minority which remains true to a higher standard of values continued to be concerned with inevitable outcome. For the majority, the physical world with its wonders was sufficient to absorb all available time and interest. The result is obvious. The physical state of man enlarged, and his ethical horizons were appropriately narrowed. The old adversaries were gone. The power of the church and state to plague the destiny of the average man was broken. It was no longer needful to struggle against the despot of feudalism or the perversities of princes. The Inquisition had lost its terror, and theology was unable to impose its traditional formulas upon a downtrodden laity. But the ills men must bear changed their appearances, not their substance. The authority of science took the place left vacant by the departing authorities of aristocracy and theology. It was still necessary for the human spirit to struggle against the intolerancies of the human mind. Personal ambitions, liberated by the new code of freedom, immediately began to dream of supremacy, a vast concept, highly competitive in principle and highly destructive in practice, perpetuated most of the instruments of the old tyranny. Siegfried had slayed the dragon, but was in grave danger of being drowned in the blood that flowed from the mortal wound. Having overcome the despotism of entrenched classes, humanity discovered the despotism in itself. It was faced with the unhappy realization that tyrannical systems are only symbols of those tyrannical instincts which exist in all creatures until they are overcome by enlightened understanding. From Hunt's History of the Seal of the United States, the reverse of the Great Seal. Professor Charles Eliot Norton of Harvard describes the design thus: the device adopted by Congress is practically incapable of effective treatment. It can hardly, however artistically treated by the design, look otherwise than as a dull emblem of a Masonic fraternity. This is one of the most important esoteric landmarks that have been conveniently ignored. It is evident that the continued operation of the genuine secret societies make it unwise to describe them or identify their members. Humanity has not yet reached a state of collective security in which leadership beyond the political sphere is unnecessary. The need for guidance actually increases with the complexity of mundane affairs. All of sincere heart find consolation in the conviction that powers beyond and above human corruption continue to administer the design of the globe. It would be a mistake to confuse this governing body with the various sects which pretend to authority, but give no indications or proof that they can manage effectively even with their own affairs. Those sensitive to subtle values will find positive indications of fortuitous intervention if they care to seek for them. The landmarks are not obvious to the profane, but years of familiarity with the proportions of the project enable the thoughtful to recognize the systematic unfoldment of the great plan. The truth is more obvious among those peoples whose religions acknowledge the existence of an invisible government. This has always been concealed in the descent of the Western mystery religion. Once Christianity had rejected paganism, it refused to recognize the esoteric orders of the pre-Christian world. It regarded them as detrimental to its own prestige and sought relentlessly to exterminate them. This was impossible, but the church refused to accept and to teach a universal religion or a universal philosophy. The spiritual mysteries of life belong to no one faith, race, or school. In order to advance itself as the supreme custodian of salvation, ecclesiasticism had to reject the mystery system. In doing so, it did not destroy that system, but forfeited its own place as an instrument for the fulfillment of the great plan. In its effort to usurp this high destiny for itself, the church obscured the very essentials of human progress and discouraged its followers from those noble and unselfish convictions which might long ago have supplied the incentives for a universal reformation of mankind. When legitimate authority passed from the church to the orders of the quest, this secret ecclesia drew to itself those who truly love mankind. Even with the passing of centuries, the rift has not been mended. Theological groups still emphasize a personal salvation achieved by miraculous means. In this case, the very word miraculous stands for the rejected esoteric tradition. It is the undefined and, for the theological, undefinable science of human regeneration. It is not sufficient to say that beyond the church is only the unknown sphere of God. Actually, beyond the church are the mysteries, guarded by the shepherds of men. There is nothing that can limit the merit of present action more completely than lack of vision about accumulative consequences of action. Humanity can release itself from defeatism only when the true proportions of the great plan are at last partly perceived. The lack of the realization of high purpose contributes to the cultivation of less desirable motives and inclinations. These secret societies are now engaged upon a broad reformation of the world educational concept. The great universities and schools must fulfill the destiny which conceived them and sustained them through long and troublous times. Humanity cannot be preserved by the 3 R's unless the universal truths locked within the forms of the arts and sciences are released. Just as mysticism once opened and revealed the secrets of religion, so must now open and reveal the secrets of science. Forms must give up the spirits locked within them. Otherwise, the seeds cannot grow and bear their proper fruit. The great tree, which is knowledge, with its 12 branches, is for the healing of the nations. Who shall say that it has revealed the fullness of its benefits? The forces opposing the essential progress of humanity are always embodiments of the 3 great enemies: ignorance, superstition, and fear. As man advances in his collective evolution, these negative obstacles support a necessary incentive for individual improvement towards collective security. Ignorance is the state of insufficient knowledge. The concept is relative, but sufficient knowledge is that which is superior to whatever circumstances may prevail. Superstition is addiction to that which is untrue. The prevailing superstition is the acceptance of materialism, an acceptance which is indefensible and undemonstrable. Fear is man's anxiety over the consequences of his own actions, becoming the victim of the collective conduct of his own kind, until every possible interpretation of the qualities of the 3 adversaries have been exhausted. The work of human enlightenment must continue. In each generation, the adept teacher must be out of sympathy with the prevailing abuses. He must always oppose entrenched corruption and strive against what has been called the static of masses. Human behavior corrupted by false doctrines resents its own benefactors. These secret societies are champions of progress through constructive change, but men fear change and doubt progress. Destiny, however, conspires against the performance of insufficient institutions. Growth is natural to the wise and inevitable for the foolish. Conditions beyond human control are forever breaking down the limitations which man has placed upon his own future. Destiny and the mysteries must win, for they are on the side of the great plan, as that which is necessary always provides the means for supplying its own necessity. The human state proves the esoteric tradition. It is not conceivable that there should be laws in space, for which there are no channels of release in human society. Truth always comes to man through man. The great initiate teachers have offered their own souls as channels for the distribution of cosmic truths. These teachers are not only unselfish, they are also adequate for the ministry which is their chosen task. Through long periods of discipleship, they have become learned in statecraft, in law, medicine, art, literature, and science. And their natures, philosophy, and mysticism have been unfolded far beyond the understanding of the profane. Obviously, the great schools, functioning through their trained and appointed messengers, constitute the highest leadership available to man or required by man. In order, however, that their work be accomplished, it is not sufficient that they have the needed vision. This vision must be communicated. It must be extended throughout human society until humanity redeems itself by the experience of enlightenment. The security that the world seeks cannot be bestowed. It must be earned. When a sufficient number has attained this degree of true leadership, the imperishable democracy of the sages will become a fact in the mortal sphere. The genuine esoteric associations always require that disciples prepare themselves for careers of practical service. The student was expected to attain to a state of unusual skill or proficiency in some branch of learning. He was then to practice this profession or craft as a means of extending his sphere of constructive influence. He was to teach through example, enriching his chosen vocation with the overtones of enlightened religious philosophy, thus gradually creating a significant zone of influence. He was available for whatever task the keepers of the great plan required. Practical ends can only be achieved by practical means, and the agents of the universal reformation must be sufficient for every emergency. Rather than attempt to indicate modern organizations which may or may not be instruments of the mystery system, it is more useful to recommend that each truth seeker make use of his own faculties of discrimination. The esoteric orders have never accepted candidates without reasonable qualifications, nor have they offered any inducements except the privilege of becoming unselfish, useful, and humble. They have never promised to gratify the whims of mortals, and have reserved the right to select in their own way those whom they believe to have the courage, the insight, and the fortitude which the magnitude of the project demanded. Human society cannot be preserved by fraternities of the unfit, even though the members be well-intentioned. Successful leaders in various materialistic fields usually lack qualifications essential for discipleship in the secret schools. Those aspiring to become initiate teachers must discipline and improve their abilities before their candidacy can be considered. Those initiates of the Western descent, whose names are known, convey a fair impression of acceptable qualifications. Such men as Roger Bacon, Francis of Assisi, Dante, Paracelsus, Basil Valentine, Robert Flood, Francis Bacon, and Saint Germain immediately recall the remarkable abilities, the wonderful devotion, and the enduring fortitude of those who resolve to devote their lives to the improvement of mankind. Quiet thinking will dissolve all doubts as to the genuine teachings of the mystery schools and the qualifications necessary to membership. Usually these schools selected their disciples, imposing upon them rules of discrimination and discretion, so that no matter of importance was entrusted to anyone still plagued by his own ambitions or likely to succumb to the temptations of worldly acclaim. From an 18th century Hermetic book, a symbolic printer's device. This vignette is a pictorial signature of the secret societies of liberty. The principal test of existing religious and mystical organizations is, therefore, their practical acceptance of collective responsibility. If the group is concerned primarily with the perpetuation of its own abstract doctrines and has proved no means for the direct application of these doctrines for the advancement of all men, something is wrong. Wisdom is not destined for the few. Certainly it must be given to a few, that through them it may be taught to the many. Any group which imposes artificial limitations of prejudice, bigotry, or intellectual exclusiveness frustrates the legitimate program of universal enlightenment. No one religion, philosophy, sect, or creed will ever be the sole custodian of the esoteric tradition. Organizations pretending to provide the only hope of salvation can be immediately discarded. The great plan has taken on innumerable appearances that meet the requirements of human evolution, but the plan itself is beyond all appearances. Many have the privilege of serving, but only the divine wisdom itself has the authority to dogmatize, and it has never indulged that prerogative. The design is not difficult to visualize if the mind and heart are properly receptive. The religions, philosophies, sciences, and arts of mankind are all ensouled organisms. They grew up in the world like flowers in a field, all nourished by the same light and moisture. It profits nothing to argue as to which of these flowers is the fairest, or which is the most likely to survive. Nor is it more practical to debate such issues as which shrub was predestined to govern the others. All are channels for the one light, which alone determines the fulfillment of the processes of growth. The separate organisms of learning must finally come together to form one vast organization. If one part be lacking, the body will be imperfect. Who shall say, in a magnificent association of this kind, that any of the fragments which form the perfect whole is unessential? Remember, the great league of learning is the democratic commonwealth, and not an autocracy of the elect. The great league is the fruit of the great plan. Once the body of knowledge has been ordered by the canons of esoteric architecture, it becomes one vast sanctuary. It is the temple built without hands, the everlasting house. Into this body, the great plan incarnates, so that the form itself, built by men through love and consecration, is ensouled with the immortal light of the mystery tradition. There are two movements in human society. One is towards understanding, and this is the unifying force. The other motion is towards misunderstanding, and this is the dividing force. Each human being advances the universal destiny to the degree that he overcomes within himself the impulses to divide and separate. It is not always possible to defend the conduct of groups or individuals, or to cooperate with that which is obviously perverse. Too often, however, division is due simply to prejudice or to those egotistical impulses which tend to oscillate through a false conviction of personal superiority. All institutions, sacred and secular, are composed of human beings. As these grow and unfold their natural consciousness, they verge towards each other by simple convictions of fraternity. Every possible effort should be made to encourage good feeling between sincere persons of different beliefs. This is only possible when all are generous and find justification in the realization of the pressing need of united effort. The pages of history reveal the irresistible unifying force operating in human affairs. The story of man is the record of the struggle upward and forward, from isolation to unification. No one can go against this motion without betraying himself, his world, and his God. All good things have come to those who have learned to work together, for this simple procedure is a symbol of civilization. Cooperation is the great work. The social alchemy which produces the universal medicine. It is recommended that the sincere truth seeker examine the various organizations which have risen in human society and determine by their works rather than their pretensions, which ones are dedicated to the advancement of world fraternity. Such associations, whether they be actual instruments of the secret societies or simply groups of sincere persons, are laboring in the light and for the light. Once convinced of the reality of the great plan, the individual also receives a vision of realities which enable him to conduct his own affairs in harmony with the larger destiny. The esoteric tradition, first embodied in the Adepts and later incarnated in the whole body of humankind, brings the kingdom of heaven to earth, a regenerated human society unfolding under the disciples of the mysteries, fashions the eternal city, which bears witness to the laws of heaven. Who shall deny that this vision of things possible to man is the noblest and most wonderful of human dreams? And who shall deny that man has within himself the power to make his dreams come true? Progress builds solid foundations under dreams. The trestle board of the mysteries is the divine dream for humanity. The mystery schools were the sacred colleges, and the first graduates of those institutions were the adept builders. These initiate builders were skilled in the arts and sciences required to transform the dream of universal brotherhood into the temporal fact of the divine commonwealth. The initiate Jesus, personifying the great plan, declared its simple rule when he said, "He that is not with me is against me." Matthew 17:30. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.